Good afternoon. Or I should say good morning. Before I go into the subject of the video, I want to give you a brief introduction to the origins of the Ouija board. I think it was 1940s. It began with the Foxy sisters, who, funny enough, Foxy sisters is a foxy situation. There's a foxy lie, and it was very foxy and deceitful. However, Britain and Europe were, if you like, recovering from the Second World War. The Foxy sisters were three sisters from New York who played an important role in the creation of spiritualism from 1814 to 1890. And obviously, due to they discovering this wicked lie, it then developed and became a British obsession. People lost their families, they lost their loved ones. And indeed, what's interesting, it was during a time when people also lost their faith in God, seeing their loved ones, battered and having their blood shed on the fields for over a water port, believe it or not. Although they claimed it was to fight the Nazis, but really started over a water port. But that's beside the point. But people lost their faith in God and decided that was there an afterlife? And they started to lose faith in Christianity. And the Foxy sisters made, if you like, a revival, and they started to say that they could commune with the spirits. So the Foxy sisters started spiritualism. I think it became dead in the West because of modern thinking, contemporary secular, thought started to develop in the West, and people moved away from any idea of the supernatural. But the Foxy sisters made it popular again and claimed that they were in touch with spirits and people's relatives. And as a result, people starting to, if you remember the 60s and 70s and 80s, most notably the 80s, young teenagers were having a fascination with the Ouija board, until you have PlayStations that took over. But now there is a fascination with Ouija boards again. So it's interesting because we live in an age of science and technology, social media. But what's interesting is that behind the scenes, the supermarkets are pushing towards kids to sell the Ouija boards. And what's interesting, a lot of people don't realize, right, and that is if a child or teenager is going on a Ouija board, they know that they are communicating. It's not a toy. They know that they are communicating with fallen beings. So you have to ask yourself the question, who is it that's pushing the sales of the Ouija boards? Who are behind it? Because while you cannot even practice your faith, while you cannot even practice Christianity, they have no problem pushing Satanism. I think they had a Satanic conference in America, and now they're campaigning that to preach against evil because you're saying Satan is evil and Satan is not evil. The Bible's right. We are going to move towards a horrible and end times confusion because everybody can claim to be whatever they want to be, and you try to critique that, you can be done for hatred. And now what's happening is that they are now pushing the Ouija board satanic agenda through the back doors. And how they're doing that is by using it as a ploy for Halloween. Halloween itself, I think it comes from Sandrine, dealing with the worshipping of the dead and spirits, etc. Or it was the word All Hallow, etc. It's all deep into witchcraft, and it's just interesting that we're coming up towards Halloween, and they're now pushing the Ouija boards just in time for Halloween. While the Christian faith is dead now in Europe, Christianity is all about money. It's all about profit. So now we have a revival for Satanism, spiritualism, and witchcraft, while the church has become lukewarm, focusing on not offending anyone. You won't hear Joel Austin or T.D. Jakes, Joyce Myers teaching or preaching against the evil of the occult. And the reason being is because they're probably eating from the same trough. What you don't attack, you're into. And it's interesting, if you look at Joel Osteen, what he talks about, the elevation of self, the spirit consciousness, and we are seeing this in this crazy and modern world that is opening itself towards Satanism. What's interesting is that many Christians like to work themselves up in a frenzy. Oh, we got a revival. Oh, God's sending a revival, etc. In truth, if you look around the Western world today, where is the revival? Where is the revival being taken place? There isn't. If anything, there is a satanic revival. Christianity now is just a footnote. Just that's all we are footnotes. Why? Because we're too cowardly to preach the gospel. We're too cowardly because we want to get paid. Our jobs are at stake. So we will just plod on, and as Christ said, let the wheat and the tare. You can't even tell who the genuine Christian, because the wheat and the tare look the same. But only God knows, which is why he says, in the end, the wheat and the tare will be separated, and the tare will be burnt up. So we can't tell, because they look so convincing. So convincing. The wheat and the tare, you can't tell the differences. But only God knows. And that's why he says, in the end times, he will separate the wheat and the tare. Hence, go back to my subject. You will not hear or listen to any sermons by preaching against the occult, etc. Now, in my book, I actually go deep into it. I was in the occult myself. And I tell you something now, it is very dangerous. You are dealing with fallen beings. And what's interesting, many the psychiatrists won't tell you this, but a lot of people who dabble in the occult end up with mental health problems. A lot of people who dabble in the occult end up with mental health problems. I will do a video on this at a later date. Okay. And what's it or a lot of them who's been bullied tend to, I teach music and I come across, sort of students who dabble in the occult. And what's interesting, they do because they want power, because they're being bullied, etc. So there's all kind of factors and reasons why young people are drawn to the darkness. And these issues the churches are not dealing with. Why? Because the church has become now, we're supposed to be the light of the world. But instead, what's happening? The world is influencing the church. If you listen to the church message, they've revamped it. They've really turned it around because they want to survive financially and economically. That's all they care about. They're not willing to go to jail or to prison for their faith. They're not willing to do that because they're in the church purely because they're being paid. They're getting paid. That's the only thing that makes them tick. Hence, they will not preach against the rising in witchcraft and occult worship inside the Western world. There is no Christian revival in the West. Let me give an example. When they say, oh, I felt the revival, it's nothing more than emotionalism. When you go to a Pentecostal church or charismatic, you're doing a praise and worship, and then you come out feeling good after release of endorphins. And you said that's a revival. No, that's not a revival. A revival is when you change whole communities. When crime rate suddenly goes down because God's presence has moved. Revival is not just affecting the church. I don't see no revival in the church anyway. Right? Revival affects the whole community. That is what real revival means. I've never seen any. Why? Why should God send a revival when at the end of the day people are too ashamed to preach the gospel? That is the reason why we now have shops confident pushing their Ouija boards, confident pushing darkness, confident. And it will get worse. You mark my words, we are told before the end times, people shall pray for death. Why? There'll be such utter confusion. We can see it now. You're not allowed to pray in schools. You're not allowed to preach from the Bible. But guess what? You can promote Satanism. You can promote Ouija board towards our children. Explain that. We are in desperate times. The church, as an organization, I emphasize, as an organization, is to blame. Nobody else. We are to blame because we have lost our first love. We've turned to money worship, idolatry worship. We've lost our first love.